Everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of Magic the Gathering Arena. Today is Wednesday, July 8th. I'll say off front, if you hear loud banging, as if someone is tearing off the roof of my house, someone is tearing off the roof of my house. Uh, Getting some, like, a complete roof remake due to some damage it sustained a few weeks ago. They probably aren't going to stop anytime soon, so it would be inefficient for me to try and not stream today at all, because I would, it would just become an excuse to procrastinate. Really, I just put it off and I just put it off and I just put it off, and I would really never accomplish anything. Much like yesterday, where I spent the entire day half playing to get to 15 victories extra, and half watching Warrior Nun on Netflix, which I can tell you don't bother watching right now because it ends on a cliffhanger, and I will not go into a full review of it or anything, but I will say that it does kind of suffer from introducing interesting characters and then ignoring them in favor of actually focusing on the warrior nuns, as it were, who are kind of the least interesting characters and most stereotyped characters. You have Shotgun Mary, who is the urban badass with two shotguns, and then you have a Asian character who's good at all the hand-to-hand combat melee stuff, and then you have a hacker girl, and let's see, there's one that's actually just, I think, mostly a depicted as more of a devout person or an demolitions expert, maybe. I personally saw the twist coming fairly halfway through the series, at the end, which is to say there is a twist. So spoilers for that, sorry. And yeah, I don't know if it was really worth it to buy a Theros Beyond Death pack, but whatever. But yeah, I did. I was dissatisfied with the way it ended, and there is a question certainly in Warrior Nun that I can't figure out, in the fact that they spend a lot of times at the beginning setting up the main enemy as both corporeal demons that are very rare, and these wraith demons that can't actually manifest in the earth realm, as it were. And it doesn't really make sense why those demons are doing the things that they do. The best explanation I can figure is that it's possible that each of the individual demons have their individual motivations, or the corporeal demons are actually not so much on the same side as the wraith demons. That's all I could really figure out, and they really don't touch on it. They introduce a science lady aspect, and they do kind of nothing with her. They introduce a lot of characters, and they do kind of nothing with them. I really liked the squatter, like rogue thief characters. Warrior Nun seems to be based off a book, but it feels a lot more like it's based off of a almost comic book serialized format content, because it does seem to in every episode intentionally have people hanging on a cliffhanger. And I really just think Netflix needs to learn their lesson here. That they need to quit making season ones of things and then ending on cliffhangers, particularly since Netflix is just as bad as any other production company, publisher of TV, as far as canceling things after cliffhangers. The Santa Clarita Diet being a great example of that. Here we have someone on the chat, Syed Al-Mulki, if that's anywhere close to how you would pronounce that. He says, "Hi, how are you?" and thumbs up. Hi, Syed. I'm doing great so far. Other than I very well may get distracted quite a bit today. Let's see. We've pretty much put the drafts in the... we moved drafts to Monday, so that gives us this workshop to do today, and then just try to get victories. And today's workshop, ironically, is the same thing I had already kind of done myself in a previous workshop, which is to make a cats and dogs deck. Although in this case, since they're giving you cards, there's more dogs, and Magic actually knows how to make decks with and knows what cards are out there. So we have a dogs deck and we have a cats deck for the most part. Although I'm not sure how much of that is actually true. Also, I believe these decks are 20 card decks, which makes it a lot easier to make a cats and dogs deck than anything else. So it asks why I might get distracted. People are working on my roof banging. You may not be able to hear it at all, but it is fairly distracting. And then he says, "Play dog, huh?" Smiley face. I'm gonna play both. I always play both. There's no reason not to. We'll give it a try, and if we win on the first try, I'll still play both. This is a triome, which would enter the battlefield tapped. Let's see. Which I think in this case is fine, because I don't have any cards to play anyways. And then we have a companion, which companions still work the same way they do now, which means I'll have to play 3, and then I'll have to pay another 3 to play it. So while we're looking for this, this would give me a creature in hand and such. So how would we want to do this? You want to activate an ability. We want a white and a black. So we have like only one black, so that's the card we wanted to play with that. And then we choose the triome, I guess, because the triome would just be more useful. Oh yeah, I didn't even quite set up the news today, but that really won't be too much of a deal. We still are very much in that position where there's not a lot of news. So it'll be fairly easy to cover all the news today and move relatively at our regular pace instead of having to try and rush through it. And then see, mutate. Do I have anything? Do I have any creatures? Let's see. that this is kind of like a late game solution. So, just gonna put this on the field, which I guess we'll try and mutate later. Yep. Why don't I play Hearthstone? I believe is the question on the chat. I did play Hearthstone for about 5 years. After the Activision Blizzard banning and attempted theft, effectively, of one of their players because he spouted a political opinion of the pro-Hong Kong movement, it became just such a hot topic, and Hearthstone after 5 years had really run its course, and it was always a little too difficult of a game, and was rather frustrating, and it was just kind of time for a change. And I was definitely getting for a brief moment there, a lot of people coming onto my channel just to basically complain about me playing Hearthstone. So it was just time to move on at that point. And I decidedly did agree with the pro Hong Kong concept, and still do, so it felt fairly easy. Activision Blizzard has just been a sleazy company for a long time, and it was frankly long overdue that I stopped playing their games. I will say it is worth mentioning that that I am only really playing Magic the Gathering Arena until the Marvel card game that is being made by Second Dinner, which is a company founded by Ben Brode, which was the guy that was originally in charge of Hearthstone, comes out. So when that Marvel game comes out, I plan to get in the beta if I can, or day one of public launch on that game. I try to be at the ground floor of a card game that doesn't have a huge history to it, and that I think will be very popular. Magic has the problem of being based off a paper card game that's many years old, so there's a lot of history there. Even though Magic Arena doesn't really, at the moment, even allow you to play a lot of those older cards. They're just not programmed in, they're just not available. But Magic also has a high greediness level, and both Hearthstone and Magic had a kind of time wasting factor that's still a little high. I would say Hearthstone was worse, and there definitely were a lot of times when I was just not bothering to do all the daily quests because it was too much of a frustration. But there is definitely a counter argument that it is Magic Arena, because theoretically Magic Arena wants you to play 15 games or get 15 victories, which is way more than playing 15 games. Let's see. So, yeah, both of them have problems, and I'm hoping that the Marvel card game is kind of more of a focused experience for younger kids, so it's a little bit cheaper, a lot more focused on the free-to-play, and something different. Now, there is definitely a risk in playing a game that's built around the Marvel IP, even though there are a lot of stories in the Marvel universe. There's not that many stories, so it could get fairly boring after a year or two if you have 25 different Spider-Man cards, or if you have the 5 different variants of the Fantastic Four. But yeah, Hearthstone is definitely not on the table. I might at some point even decide to just quit playing a collectible card game if I could find something else that was slow enough. And I would say Magic is not even slow enough for my likings, so that I can cover the video game news, which I still feel like I need to as a video game critic, even though the vast majority of looking at all the video games that come out and talking about the news is kind of depressing. But it's something that I think you just have to kind of live with. Is that, yeah, a large amount of games that come out are garbage on Steam, and a large amount, an ever increasing amount of video game news is depressing negative news. I could tap this and put a 1/1 creature. What does this say? As an additional cost of spell, tap an untapped creature you control. Exile tap creature. Put a 1/1 counter on creature tapped. What is... So... yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense what just happened. This is a weird card. It puts a 1/1 on a creature and then just exiles it, destroying the 1/1. As if that mattered. So now we have a target creature we could use to fight other target creatures. And we have this situation where I don't really want to read this. So I'm just gonna have this do that and see what happens. And just no attacks, I guess. Sad said, I watch you and eat, and then he says, yes, smiley face, smiley face. Yeah, it's definitely not a bad plan to eat food, do 2 or 3 things while watching a YouTuber. In the accountability section, I'll say I finished playing 7 Billion Humans, the sequel to Human Resource Machines. It's a programming game. It's pretty bad. In fact, looking at the screenshots of Human Resource Machine, it looks like 7 Billion Humans is actually a step behind what its predecessor was. And I don't really see a justification for that to ever be the case. But yeah, I finished it. I wouldn't really recommend people play it, even if you are into programming. Its programming language is exotic, to say the least. Exoteric might be a better word. And then I, for a brief moment, started to play the World of Goo, which I swear I've played that game at least once and put the footage on my YouTube channel, but I don't see it. So I believe what happened is that this was one of the very early games I covered on my YouTube channel that got content ID claimed and or actual, I don't think I've ever actually gotten a copyright strike, but I got content ID claimed and I disputed it, and the owners of the game, the Tomorrow Corporation, which is just like two people, fought the dispute, and that just frustrated me, and I think I just deleted it. In playing World of Goo, it is not really worth going back and playing a second or third time, and it's not worth really covering. But yeah, that is, I figure, worth mentioning. There's only been a few game creators who have been just obnoxious, and during my early first year or so of being a YouTube content creator with content ID claims. And with the exception of Warner Brothers, which just content IDs all music for everybody, and they like really suck. They do it under their Universal Music Group, UMG. The other companies that have been obnoxious have been the creator Braid, the creator of an indie game called, I believe, Trauma, and I believe the World of Goo creators. So oddly, it's the three independent game developers that seems to either not have their stuff together as far as content ID and copyright, or they used licensed music that was going to get everybody who played the game content ID and copyrighted, or the indie people are just kind of jerks, and they're worse at hiding the fact that they're jerks than a standard AA or AAA game development company. So yeah, that's definitely the reason why I don't have any footage of Braid on my channel, is because I covered that too and it got content ID claimed. Whereas everything else, like, I think approaching 9,000 videos on my channel, and I can tell you, again, with the exception of the Lego games that are Warner Brothers, which maybe if Microsoft actually does buy the Warner games, that those content ID claims would actually go away. That would be nice. But with the exception of those, I don't get content ID claims. Now, I have done things in the fact that I've reduced the volume of games quite a lot to avoid that. And I think most people recognize, if they actually look, that I'm so incessantly and constantly talking over games and the noise and adding commentary non-stop that it's fair use, and it totally ruins the experience for anybody who just wanted to see a no commentary gameplay video. Which, if anything, as a video game YouTuber, I would love to see YouTube crack down on the no commentary stuff. I know people like the no commentary stuff, but the option for that fan base is to just mute the video and just watch it in silence, or watch it when with some other audio playing in the background. But as a content creator, you just are not approaching anything close to fair use if you're just playing a game. I cannot believe the argument and buy into the argument that fair use extends to, well, this is my unique gameplay, even if I'm not talking over it and adding anything visually or auditorially. All I'm adding is my interactions. Now, if you want to make the argument that the copyright laws should be changed, I am full with you on that idea. And I think we should probably have extremely limited copyright protection for a lot of things, considering how it has not really helped any content creator or anything. And it is just one of many examples that are out there of how capitalism does not help creative people and creators. It just creates this confusing, messed up bureaucracy system of legal protections, and it keeps lawyers employed. Whereas if there were absolutely no copyrights anywhere in the law in the world, but you were given, say, a grant to create whatever you wanted to create every year, if people were just had like a universal basic income, and then they were given a grant, and perhaps if you need more than what the grant offers, you then have to like combine grant monies between different people and work as a group, or you have to petition people or do like a GoFundMe, like, or Patreon. That those ideas would be a lot better than the idea of copyright, where you have to create something, then you have to work with lawyers and publishers and all kinds of paper pushers and management types to then protect the thing you created so you can sell it to people so that you could then feed yourself. And the current system really does take the idea of a starving artist a little too far. Let's see. Ed says, what do you think about the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X, I assume? It's unique. I'll talk about the PlayStation 5 in first place. There's a couple of concerns that I think the PlayStation 5 has not addressed so far. One is it's so freaking tall that it almost assuredly will not fit on Japanese shelves that are only tall enough to hold like books the height of a manga usually. And so it has moved as it tries to outbeat the Xbox Series X in power. It has moved into being a very large electronic device, and as a Japanese company that probably still cares about being the #1 console in Japan, that they've moved very arrogantly in that fashion to just assume that their native country, Japan, will buy the PlayStation 5 and have it in their house. I wouldn't be surprised if it is rejected in their own country and people just go to either smaller PCs, because you could probably get a smaller PC these days than the size of a PlayStation 5 and have roughly the same amount of power, or they're just going to go straight to mobile gaming, which if a Japanese company, typically the way Japanese people think, they only care about their internal sales. So if Sony of Japan sees that the PlayStation 5 is selling particularly poorly in Japan, we may see very little support from Sony of Japan as far as first-party titles or trying to get third-party titles on the console. It seems like Sony of Japan has already given up before they even started this fight, because they've let Sony Interactive Entertainment, or Sony Entertainment Interactive, SEI, yeah, it's called SEI. They've let the California group take control, and there's already a ton of SJW stuff that the California group has implemented, and that is showing some bad planning. Why would you want this to get minus plus? No, that's +2. So I could give it +2 if I wanted to. So, like, one of the things we have definitely seen Sony of the California offices of Sony do is already add and require a lot more censorship in the Japanese games, particularly. There's a lot of violence and some awkward sexualization of the Last of Us character, who's fairly young. The camera in one scene, from what I hear, pans over her while she's in her underwear, to put it nicely. There we won with dogs, although that was kind of a shallow victory, and I don't really see a desire here to try to play this some more. I wasn't really getting a great feel. I think the cats and dogs concept is a funny concept, but even playing a deck designed by Wizards of the Coast really didn't make it feel like there was a great synergy there. And my previous deck that had both cats and dogs merged together for a 60 card deck instead of only cats and only dogs for a 60 card deck. I feel like that had a little bit more synergy. So let's go there. So yeah, The Last of Us 2 was allowed to show stuff that has been censored out of a lot of the Japanese third-party titles, and the Japanese third-party publishers have already just said it has gotten a lot more difficult to deal with Sony than it was back when Sony of Japan was running everything. And it's not the same problem with the Nintendo Switch. So PlayStation 5, as far as Sony of Japan is concerned, its main competitor is the Nintendo Switch, and it is seemingly, even before it's out there, completely failing at that job. So I don't know if this ends up with the PlayStation 5 being particularly a poor experience, even if it is a powerhouse in hardware. It may just be a poorer experience. They really could have done well to announce an upgrade to their interface instead of just not mentioning it. They definitely needed a smaller thing. There was a problem with one of the previous PlayStation hardware designs where the slots were so big or just the right size that cockroaches were particularly common to crawl inside of PlayStation units in infested houses. This would be another thing that Japanese people would never really even think about or deal with, because they're fastidiously clean and would not allow cockroaches. Well, actually, I don't think cockroaches are native in Japan, actually. I don't think there are any cockroaches. They're not native to the island. There's some Hercules beetles and things like that, but so the slits for the cooling on the PlayStation 5 are a bit of a concern to me. Man, I love these free victories too. I feel like both the Xbox and the PlayStation 5 need an upgrade to their controller. We need something like a mouse wheel to swing between multiple weapons. We've hit this point where every first-person shooter, and let's face it, a lot of games are first-person shooters, at most can only have 8 options to go in a circle to choose a weapon, and usually you have to hit like right bump or something to pull up the weapon select dialog. And there's just, as games get bigger and more guns are going to be inevitably implemented. It's just getting harder and harder to do that. The D-pads can only be like marked to one or two loadouts usually. So yeah, I definitely think there should be another button somewhere. But otherwise, I think that they've locked down the controllers to as nice as they are. Although I will say the PlayStation 5 controller might be a little bit of a pain to hold on to if you have large hands. As for the Xbox Series X, it feels like Microsoft hasn't been for a very long time taking its name very seriously, in the fact that this is effectively the Xbox Sex, is what people are going to eventually start calling it, and that's what I was calling it from day one. And if they were just going to double down on that and say, yeah, we're going to let all the adult games, adults only rated games on their consoles, that would be interesting, but it won't happen because Walmart probably wouldn't sell the Xbox Series X hardware if they allowed adult only games, and Walmart would definitely not sell adult only games in their stores. Microsoft has never taken, well, maybe they have tried to take selling in Japan seriously, but they've failed miserably on that part. I think that is just because they didn't know what they were doing in a lot of ways. They need in Japan to have a little anime girl mascot. Everything has a mascot in Japan. Train lines, cities, baseball teams. Well, that's not that uncommon even in the West, but everything has a mascot. And the fact that they didn't make some kind of mascot to get people's attention is ridiculous. The Xbox Series X is smaller than the PlayStation 5, so if you must have a console, that there is a slight argument there, but not really a great one because you're still competing against the Nintendo Switch and mobile gaming. The Microsoft lineup took an extremely long time originally to get the Japanese games on their platforms, and I mean the original Xbox and the Xbox 360 took a long time, so they've really failed to establish themselves as even being a viable option. Microsoft probably doesn't have the connections or hasn't established the connections to literally get the hardware in people's stores. Like, that is a big issue too. That even if you were trying to buy one, you probably would have to go to a very specialty shop in Akihabara to find it. You're not just going to find it in a standard video game shop. I mention the Japanese market because effectively Japanese games are the second half of the gaming industry. If you don't have Japanese game support, at least at some point, you're missing out on half of the audience. It's not just that the Japanese games sell well in Japan, they sell well all throughout Asia and many other non-United States countries. So it's not a matter that Microsoft needs to focus solely on Japanese games, but they definitely need to make a hard effort to get it in there. And I've often fantasized that if I was put in charge of it, there's a lot you can do that obviously hasn't been done. Like, you really need to smooth the third-party publishers in Japan so that they actually want to do business with you and that they feel like they can do business without insulting Sony, which at this point, this is kind of the first point in the past couple of years where Sony has kind of stabbed the third-party publishers in the back, and so now, since those third-party publishers feel a little bit slighted, now would be the time to swoop in. Hardware-wise, it seems like the Xbox Series X is more powerful. Price-wise, we don't know on either, but it seems like both will be fairly expensive. Although the pandemic also will probably affect the amount of units that they even try to sell this year quite a bit. So Microsoft does have a unique memory module that they've made, basically a proprietary equivalent to a memory card, and I don't know if that's a particularly great idea, but the reason they did it is the argument that they always make is that they wanted to make sure that it had a high speed experience for everybody for loading games or removing loads in games. Both of these hardware units have a particular problem in the sense that for me as a YouTube content creator, I just don't have enough internet speed to upload 4K video, nor do I really have a 4K monitor. I wouldn't even buy a 4K monitor if I could right now. I'd buy a 1080p with high dynamic range instead and get better colors and instead. 144 hertz refresh rate would be nice, but again, as a content creator who plays PC games, those are all very, very expensive upgrades for minimal benefits that probably would not affect the quality of my recordings at all. A great equivalent of that is I did buy a GTX 2080 RTX, and it really hasn't changed my experience for 99.9% of all the games I've played, because 99% of all the games I've played are older than ray tracing technology and don't support it. A lot of games I play are just super old in the first place. Some barely even have adjustable resolutions. So both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X do feel like they are just upgraded versions of the previous consoles, and there is a great argument for a lot of people to instead buy a used PlayStation 4 Pro or an Xbox One S or Xbox One X or whatever the powerful ones are. And that's a whole lot of talk without mentioning games at all. The real selling point will be the games. So, for instance, if the Xbox Series X wanted to do great in Japan, it would get the next Dragon Quest game. That's really all I have to do. Get the next Monster Hunter game, get the next Dragon Quest game. Those are the top two selling by far console games that come out. And that would be a great success for the Xbox Series X and bring a lot of that Japanese audience. If the PlayStation 5 wanted to succeed, it should get exclusives for things like Call of Duty and other first-person shooters in the United States, and be the best place to do that, to play those games, maybe even Battlefront. And in a lot of ways, I would say the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5 may succeed at that, or have already succeeded at that, and it still was not really enough. It is an interesting situation where you have Microsoft on one side being fairly incompetent at running a video game division, with Microsoft as a company in totality being kind of a poorly run megalith of a corporation. And then on the other hand, you have Sony of Japan being an apathetic video game company, because Sony of Japan just doesn't seem like they care about the video game consoles. In a lot of ways, Sony of Japan never really cared about the PlayStation, because it was the PlayStation 1 was really more focused and more successful because it was a DVD player, which then gained momentum and pushed people to the PlayStation 2. Maybe the PlayStation 1 only played CDs, but the PlayStation 2 definitely was getting bought as a cheap DVD player, and that caused it to be super successful, particularly in Japan. And the PlayStation 3 was definitely a great Blu-ray player. In fact, I have a PlayStation 3 in front of me still to play a Blu-ray if I ever decided to actually play a Blu-ray, and that is my only Blu-ray player still, and I probably should upgrade it. So the PlayStation 5 probably will try and support 4K ultra high definition Blu-rays. I think it does. They've already announced that, but so will the Xbox Series X, so there's not as much competition. But my point there is that Sony is an electronics company first and foremost. They want to sell TVs. They want to sell cameras. They would like to sell Blu-ray players. Sony owns some of the movies, like Sony Pictures owns licenses to a lot of movies, and they make a lot of money selling discs, or at least they have in the past. Perhaps they don't really make that much money now for that. Sony has kind of failed to be a market leader in PC hardware, although at some points they were, and I really wouldn't buy a Sony surround sound system these days. So yeah, I think it's just apathy is hurting Sony more than anything, and they need some fresh blood in charge of Sony that is still kind of a Japanese person. But even that becomes a problem in the Japanese corporate setup, because even if the old 90-year-old that's the CEO of Sony, which I'm guessing he's probably about 90 years old, even if he retires, there's so much mentality about honoring your elders in Japan that they still won't change anything. So things just become this institutionalized way things are always done, and that's why most businesses in Japan are still using a fax machine to this day, because that's just how things are done, and we're too conservative. It's an extremely conservative in the proper definition of the term country, in the sense that they just don't want to change anything. They just don't like new ideas. So yeah, that's what I think about the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 4. It'll really come down to price and the games lineup to drive the audience, unless somebody does something really crazy, and I think everybody's just going to be very careful to not do anything crazy. I'll also mention that today is the last day of the Steam Summer Sale, and I logged in there, got the last trading card that I could get through going through the Steam Curator thing. I was one trading card short of having a full set to get the badge at level 1. I purchased that trading card for 7 cents and then made the badge, and then I accidentally clicked the wrong buttons and sold all the extra cards I had, which on accident made me way more money than I thought it would have. So I got like a full $1. Yeah, I mean, it's still pennies, but I got quite a lot of Steam wallet credit just by selling the trading cards, which honestly opens the door to next sale. Maybe I'll just get a bunch of trading cards, not even make a level 1 badge, and instead just sell everything for an extra $1. I still feel like we're in a position where Steam is kind of giving up on the idea of trading cards and the marketable, tradable emoticons and backgrounds that you would get when you crafted a badge. Instead, they're going towards a money in only system where you get store credit and only store credit and nothing else. So the money can never be used for actual games, or instead you're getting tokens effectively that can be used for untradable, unmarketable emoticons, which are effectively the same thing that had already existed. Interesting. I was hoping that somebody would have blocked, but it chose not to. So yeah, that turned out, even though I made a mistake and did not plan to do that, that turned out fairly well for me. Here we have a game that came out on Steam called Maze Banquet, which is an RPG Maker tagged game. It's been a while since we've seen a game that really does look like it is just an RPG Maker game. This one looks particularly poorly animated, and at a certain point this looks more like a visual novel to me than an actual RPG, because if it was an actual RPG you'd expect to see some battles or storefront or trading. They're selling it for $7.19 and it's English only. Yep. I don't think it'll probably take like 2 weeks of seeing sustained releases before I would actually be comfortable enough to say it seems like we're back to the old amount of games getting released and coming out, and it would have to be probably a couple of weeks of particularly good game releases coming out, and I imagine we're not going to see a lot of that. I imagine what we're going to see is a very large amount of slowdown, much like the network is slowing down here, or this guy's network sucks, or something. See, and if he destroys that, then that does just 1 damage, and I could sacrifice that and that would do 2. But that won't work. So yeah, I expect for the next 12 months to however long this pandemic continues to go on, like just go ahead and assume that if the pandemic ended tomorrow and everybody had full confidence to go back to work and make money and spend money like they used to, it still probably would be 12 months after that point. Like that's where I think I would put it. So yeah, I imagine we will just be kind of in a slight video game depression, which is not a bad thing because it gives people more time, although more time might not really mean anything because it may not really fund or give any more money to game developers. So if they could tell, if a publishing company said, well, you can take 6 more months, but we're not giving you any more budget, that might help a little bit by allowing people to just say, well, we can work slower at the same price since we've got nothing better to do. Um, but most video game developers probably would not be happy with that arrangement by any means. Like, there are definitely scenarios in some of the jobs I worked where if they said we'll give you twice as much time at the same amount of pay, or at half of the amount of pay, then I might consider that. But I don't think for most people that is doable or reasonable. And I would have done a ton more damage if needed be. Trying to get up to Platinum Tier 1 again this month. I'm really shocked that I've managed to get that far. Gamma Sutra has an article, a job listing for Yacht Club Games as a mid to senior gameplay programmer. We have seen a slight increase in job listings over the past couple months, whereas 3 or 4 months ago we were seeing basically none. It's also kind of interesting to see that C and C++ are still, for the most part, the de facto programming languages that are used for video game programming, and I think most programming. So if you are going to try and learn programming, C++, really just jump to C++ is probably your best bet. Not doing anything like C# or anything weird like Java is probably your best bet. And their HTML and like Python are kind of fun little languages you can learn as a step up to C++, but honestly both of those will teach you something so incredibly different from C and C++ that you're potentially going to lead to confusion. Learning programming is often more about learning how to learn programming languages more than it is about learning how to actually program with a specific language. Moving on, TechRaptor has an article. A new Battletoads game has been rated in Brazil, which is an interesting thought. Although it's probably not going to blow the world up. Apparently there was a announcement for a Battletoads game in 2019, and this is one of those examples that often happen in the video game world where you get a game that's announced and then it takes a year before anything else gets announced, so people forget about it completely. It looks like this Battletoads game is mostly a kind of beat 'em up game, player versus player, almost maybe with some Mario Party elements to it. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a level-based game. It probably is relatively short, if I was to guess. OpenCritic has an article here that the Mafia Definitive Edition has been delayed a month. The re-releases / bundling of the Mafia games on Steam, and then having a definitive edition coming out for the first game and the second game, and then not really being able to do a definitive edition or in any way really fix the third game, puts it in a weird position. I feel like the Mafia game in particular is so down the list as far as series that have relevance to that. It's kind of like the Payday games. Like, sure, they've been talked about enough, that I recognize them, but they also definitely feel like games that I could easily skip and just never play. And the third game in the series kind of takes the game in a different way, so there is even more reason to there's definitely even more reason to not bother trying to have that game be a part of the experience. I don't know if we're actually going to connect here. And I'm wasting time here programming my ad blocker to block Wikipedia. And there are the ads. Yep, we are not getting anywhere with that. We're gonna have to exit out and reload. Gamma Sutra has an article. THQ Nordic's Kingdom of Amalur Reckoning remaster opens the door for new DLC. THQ still basically buying as many companies as they can, although they've kind of slowed down on that in the past 4 or 5 months. No surprise there. And putting out re-releases. There is still problems though with their re-releases, and the fact that they're not really impressing anyone, and their new games aren't really impressing anyone. So I don't know what happens to then give THQ Nordic, or just THQ as it almost certainly will soon be called, a good brand name recognition, because they are coming off a lot more like a Devolver Digital, who run about 50-50 on as far as the quality games that they publish, or like an Atari that just puts out old games and makes remasters of old games, instead of somebody that has some AAA thing that seems interesting. In fact, of all the THQ Nordic companies that are owned, I can't think of any new AAA game that they are actually developing at this point. One assumes that there is a Darksiders 4 in development. One assumes that, with no confirmation. But that is it. Whereas if they had said that they were going to put out a new SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for the Bikini Bottom game remaster, and they were working on a brand new SpongeBob SquarePants game at the same time, that would have been great information and great news. But that's not what happened. And I could probably go through a long list of things that they have put out as remasters and such. But in all fairness, that they are saying that opens the door for new DLC for Kingdoms of Amalur, which is interesting. Yeah, Magic Arena does not want to load. Sometimes I think it's my overlay software that causes it to crash. Sometimes I think it's just straight up Magic Arena. Yeah, it's just like it's straight up crashing. Alright, I'll close the overlay software. It's a buggy program. We never had this kind of problem with Hearthstone. But yeah, I guess maybe it is the overlay software, because there it starts to work. Let's hop back into a game then, after taking that little break. TechRaptor, who has a advertising agreement with Nutaku. Has an article here talking about a new game called Sorakana that lets you charge into battle with sexy alchemists. Nutaku being an adult game site, same parent company as Pornhub. Seems like it is probably mostly a cell phone or tablet focused game, and it looks like it's kind of an idle RPG or a direct RPG from the looks of it. And you can see there's seems to be quite a lot of different currencies, as there tend to be in all the games. None of the Nutaku games really have yet to hit a level of quality that I feel like they should have hit. But there is also an argument that being the effectively the Playboy of porn video games is not worth the money that it would take and the effort, considering how any no-name adult game developer could do just about the same. And do just about as well. Moving on, Gamasutra has an article. A former Microsoft executive, Peggy Johnson, signs on as Magic Leap CEO. This is another example of how there's really not a lot of room for growth in Microsoft. So, but that is kind of true anywhere. You're highly unlikely to become the CEO of a company, but you could be a high-level executive of a company and then go work for another go be hired by a different company to be a CEO. And that is just somewhat around the idea of new blood, fresh blood. Where if the CEO is out, they want somebody new and not somebody who just worked for the CEO and would have done the exact same thing that the CEO did, usually. If that's not the case, then the CEO, any current CEO would have had a succession plan in which they would have already named who was going to replace them, and the board would have approved that replacement. This isn't video game related, but I wanted to talk about it. TechRaptor sometimes talks about board games and tabletop games. Apparently, the Librarians card game is coming to Kickstarter in 2020. Now, the Librarians, if you don't know, and I don't blame you if you don't know, are I believe, TNT TV series that hasn't made a new episode in, I would say, at least 5 years, and I'm fairly certain has just been completely canceled. It would be fairly hard to bring back a lot of these actors, and auspiciously, the main actor is not on this picture. It is important to mention that, yeah, this guy is old, and I believe dead in the series, but he comes back as a ghost. Here, I have to play for a second and then I'll get back to us. The Librarians TV series, which is what this is based off of a series of 3 or 4 fairly successful direct-to-cable television movies under the same name, which is effectively Indiana Jones rip-off movies, except for it's still very much like Indiana Jones. The ancient artifacts, like the Staff of Ra, for example, is a good one, or Excalibur, have magical powers. There's a character who is kind of a chosen one, destined to collect these items and hide them in a magical library that is, I believe, kind of a pocket dimension that keeps these magical items away from other people and people who would abuse it and ruin the world. In the TV series, these 3 people are potential replacements for the actual current librarian, and they decide to work together as a team and work out of a side office to do exactly the same thing. So just like lower budget and less famous people. Although, in all fairness, the famous person, the main guy, is in almost all the episodes too. I imagine he is probably the holdout and the reason why the show got canceled in the first place. He was kind of constantly appearing and disappearing, and running off on his own, which constantly made the rest of the actors feel like a B team and made it kind of an annoying show to watch. This guy is a cool thief archetype. This is a kind of intelligent assistant. This girl is the bodyguard of the librarian, the main librarian, although she seems to kind of work with these side librarians. This girl had like high mathematical abilities that at some point just became magical abilities for some episodes. And this guy is kind of the down-to-earth guy. They're comparing it to Warehouse 13, and honestly, there was just a whole collection of sci-fi shows where it's a item of the week concept. There was a mini series called The Key. I feel like there was probably some Steven Spielberg, not Steven Spielberg, but Stephen King books of possessed magical items all over the place. There was, before Warehouse 13, Eureka was another show that was a science item gone awry a week, which effectively was just a magical item of the week. I don't think before the Key miniseries, though, there was any real TV series like that until you go back to Friday the 13th, the TV series, which probably was the first instance of something like that, where every week there's just an item, and they're effectively Monster of the Week stories, but with items instead of people. Here you can see Tech Raptors talking about it. See, in the mid-2000s there were 3 original films, later adapted to a 4-season television series. They would have gone 5 seasons for syndication if something hadn't gone wrong. But why in the world would you make a collectible card game based on this now? And why would you not have the likeness of the main character smack dab in front of it now? If anything, if this was like testing the waters, I don't even know what you would be testing the waters for other than to do a full-on reboot, which, I mean, that wouldn't hurt. Like, if somebody was going to do a full-on reboot of any of those shows, they would work as well as they did now back then, which was to say they had at best moderate success and were never breakout hits. They probably are a little bit more budget than most TV shows and channels would want to spend, though, because unlike most shows, well, look at like the CW Marvel shows. No, DC shows. The CW doesn't have any Marvel shows. They're all DC shows. The vast majority of Flash, for instance, every episode is shot in relatively the same sets. It's the operating room, it's the apartment or where the Flash lives, it's maybe the medical room or the lab, all of which are kind of at Star Labs. I believe it's Star Labs. So there's just a lot of repeated locations. And even though there's a bad guy of the week and some CG, the bad guy of the week and the CG are often extremely limited to one scene, in which the Flash does effectively the same thing every week, in that he runs really fast, and because he can run really fast, that allows him to defeat the bad guy. I should have not done that. Wasn't ready to do that. I should have played this first. So yeah, the Librarian TV series in particular had a lot more sets, a lot more actors, a lot more characters. And you kind of need that because you have to go different places. The enemies don't just come to you like the Flash TV series, which of course the Flash TV series has had some actors get canceled in cancel culture, so who knows what's going to happen with that series if it goes on anywhere. But yeah, that is weird to say the least. I'm gonna, we're not getting enough victories for me to continue to play standard. I'm gonna try and kind of rush this to make sure I have 10 victories by the end of the stream if I can. It is definitely weird to put out a Kickstarter and maybe test the waters for a reboot of a TV series. There's definitely a bigger problem with TNT or TBS. Actually, the Librarians may have been on TBS. And cable channels in general. Pretty much all the cable channels, with the exception of FX, have one, maybe two primetime shows or shows that are in development and airing at any point. A ton of those cable channels need to be merged into one and just get less numbers. Nobody's really impressed these days by having 300 channels. They're irritated by having 300 channels, and nobody is impressed. Except for very old people that don't know how to use Netflix and streaming services, or just on demand on their TV services, which most TV services have on demand integrated anyways. There's no reason to run reruns anymore. So it would make a lot more sense to merge like TNT, TBS, and maybe even FX together. Those are probably all owned by different people. Merge 3 channels like that together and be done with it, so you have at least 3 things airing every night on prime time, instead of so many things that air once a week, often on Sunday night. These cable channels would probably get no ratings whatsoever if there wasn't time shifting being accounted for in people recording things. Now, I think the Sci-Fi channel is probably a great example of that. Although who I would merge the Sci-Fi channel with, I don't know, because it'd probably be a mess regardless. Like in a weird way, you probably would want to merge the Sci-Fi channel with Adult Swim and Comedy Central, and have some nights have some sci-fi and have some nights have things. You could probably merge the Sci-Fi channel with CW, since half of that is sci-fi stuff anyways. And then there's just a ton of cable channels that have absolutely nothing to offer. Paramount channel, which I believe used to be Spike TV, has basically 2 shows, one of which is my favorite show, Bar Rescue, but if you told me Paramount Channel was going to merge with TBS, I would have no problem with that whatsoever. Anyways, back to video games. TechRaptor has an article. 75 million people have played Rocket League in its first 5 years. That is a lot of people. Definitely a lot of people. That is one of those numbers indications, though, where I need to check the charts and see how many units sold. That really puts it, because it probably puts it in the top 100 best-selling games of all time. But assuming all of those people actually bought it, that Rocket League was probably given to a lot of people also. But it's almost certainly not in the top 10. Next, we have a game on Steam called Escape the Clinic, which looks like an Escape the Room horror game, which, from the looks of it, kind of looks like it's an asset flip horror game, closest in comparison to something like Slenderman. It's free, so I guess the price is right. English with allegedly full audio. Let's see. If I was actually trapped in a hospital, a modern hospital, I don't know how creepy that really would be. It would be a little disconcerting that I was in a foreign area, but modern hospitals tend to not to be super empty, which I guess would be kind of creepy if there was one that was super empty. But you would have to do a lot more. Now, if you were trapped in a decrepit hospital with rusty pipes and cobwebs and all of that, that definitely adds a lot more atmosphere. Because think about what a modern hospital, a well-kept hospital is. It's this sterile environment with empty hallways, or mostly empty hallways, except for like medical carts. There's not a lot of nooks and crannies for people to jump out of corners. They're long straight halls that often just go into rooms. Compare that to, say, the house in Resident Evil 1, where there's twists and turns and hallways and windows and like lots of places where you could get lost, lots of places where things could jump out at you. I guess a lot of the fear of hospitals is just that people don't want to be in hospitals, or people have been in hospitals in their past when they were at their most vulnerable. So I guess maybe you could tell a story where you were really vulnerable. There is like a VR game where you are tied to a wheelchair or something and you can't move. So I guess if you were stuck in a wheelchair in a hospital trying to escape, if you were very vulnerable, if you were very weak, if you were in pain the whole time, if it was just this psychological horror of you're not capable of doing what a normal human could normally do, that certainly could add something to it. But I don't know if video game writers are good enough writers to tell that kind of story, honestly. Moving on, Gamatsu has an article. Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown announced for PC. It's an open world driving and lifestyle experience. So it looks like a racing game. Let's see. Looks like this trailer is just going to show some shiny cars, which I guess is the right way to sell a car racing game. We had already talked about it, but Gamma Sutra has an article, if it will load, and it won't, saying that Microsoft is eyeing purchasing the Warner Brothers Games division from AT&T. Apparently AT&T has got a lot of debt. It feels like maybe AT&T accomplished a merger by ladening themselves with a lot of debt, which there is this process. It's the thing that brought down Toys R Us in particular, where investors buy companies by creating this debt that they have no intention of paying back and putting it as a burden on the company that they just bought, ensuring that that company goes out of business and goes bankrupt. I don't want to claim that everything I don't understand in large-scale financial transactions is money laundering and fraud, but it sounds a lot like money laundering and fraud to a layman. Moving on. TechRaptor has an article. Nacon announces new controller peripherals for the next generation. I don't know Nacon as a third-party controller manufacturer, and I really wouldn't bother to ever buy a third-party controller manufacturer. I haven't ever seen this guy before at TechRaptor. Even if there was a really great third-party controller, I still wouldn't really recommend it to people, because it's just not going to be the experience that the programmers are using in programming too. It's not going to be an experience that most people are going to have. So there's no real reason for that. The only exceptions I'd make to that is if you wanted to buy a fairly nice steering wheel because you play a lot of racing games, I'd be fine with that. And if you want to buy a heads-up HOTAS setup because you're into flight simulators, well, then you probably are having an average experience that most HOTAS players would have at that point, because most flight simulator players do at least aspire to play the games with those kind of controllers. But if it's just a slight improvement or slight change from what a standard Xbox controller or a standard PlayStation controller experience is going to be, that there's I don't think enough of a reason to change. I would argue there's probably a good argument if you get a Switch to immediately get the Pro controller for the Switch. I don't think I would want to play most Switch games with the Joy-Con if I could avoid it. Let's see. Want to draw a card, I guess, so let's go ahead and draw a card. TechRaptor has an article here. Ubisoft Forward Games lineup revealed for July 2020 showcase. So apparently some games are going to be shown. Apparently it's going to be Watch Dogs. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I think there's been a couple of leaks of that. The Division 2, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Hyperscape, Just Dance 2020, Trackmania, and Watch Dogs Legion, and a few other surprises. I imagine Ubisoft is itching to have some good news right about now, considering all the bad news that has been brought onto their company, perhaps deservedly so, from the sounds of it, from abusive employers and employees abusing other employees. That Ubisoft lineup would be kind of groundbreaking if it turned out all of those games were going to be exclusive to the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox Series X. Like that would certainly be one of the kind of things that could happen that would shift to one side. But I imagine we're going to have a very even generation where half of the people choose Xbox, half of the people choose PlayStation, as long as the prices are comparable. And a lot of it will probably just boil down to whatever your friends are playing. The easiest decision here is simply just go on social media or however you talk with your friends and see what they're saying. If all your friends are saying, yeah, we're PlayStation's gonna win, then yeah, get a PlayStation. At the very least, if the PlayStation turned out to be horrible, you'll have some solidarity and shared misery between your friends. If they're saying Xbox, get an Xbox. If they're saying the right answer, PC, get a PC. If they're saying Switch, get a Switch. It really is just that simple. Just go with your group of friends. So, I have not seen a troll game on Steam as bad as this. Probably ever, but this is pretty crazy. Crazy that it was allowed on Steam in the beginning. We have Chair Effing Simulator, which is some kind of punching bag, as far as I can tell, that is humping chairs. That's seemingly the game. And see, I don't know if this is some kind of joke that is just I've never heard of. They're selling it for $1.99. Like, yeah, I don't know if this is a troll joke that has just popped up, or if this was something that was a joke for like 5 seconds somewhere and then somebody spent way too much time making a game on it, or if it's just an original concept. But yeah, why was that allowed on Steam is always my question with some of these games. It seems like F***KICKING should be searched and red flagged as far as Valve. And Valve should say, no, we don't want a game at least by that name. Like, nobody's gonna bat an eye if Valve told some small independent troll developer, you've got to change that name. That we won't allow that in our storefront. Nobody would have batted an eye. Nobody would have listened to cries of censorship in that case. Moving on, Gamatsu has an article. Spider Studios announces Steel Rising for the PS5, Xbox Series X, and PC. King Louis VI's Automata army is terrorizing and suppressing the citizens of Paris. So, this is some weird game by the looks of it. Like a alternate history in which robots are suppressing the French Revolution. And see, this shows so much graphics that I suspect that this is actually it's an interesting idea, certainly, but I suspect that this is actually some kind of strategy game that actually doesn't have any content. Let me see if they mention what kind of game it is. Well, they're saying it's an action-focused game. Or it's going to be more action-focused than their previous games. And I don't even know what Spider Studios has made previously, so it would be probably informative to know that. Although when I search Spider Studios, it just brings up spiders in general until the third link. Let's see. They made Sherlock Holmes vs. Jack the Ripper in 2009. They made Grey Matter of Orcs and Men, Greedfall. the Technomancer bound by flames, Mars Warlogs, Fairy Legend of Avalon. Yeah. So yeah, it seems like they are trying something different here with this new game, which is certainly an interesting idea, and I do like new, and I do like different. This. Probably would be nice if my deck did a little bit more than have this one win condition or 2 or 3 synergized win conditions. But heck, it works, so why stop using something that works? I'm gonna play it a little bit safe here and go ahead and cycle this cat 2 more times. Then I'm gonna activate it. Actually, I don't really need to do that. I may not have needed to do that in the first place, so we'll just go ahead and do that. But remember, I could have done 1 more damage. And see, when I have to sacrifice 10 non-land permanents here, I certainly sometimes could play a little bit smarter and sacrifice different cards, but I'm so certain that I'm gonna win that it doesn't even become a concern. And I'll just pick 10 of the fastest options. Next game we have on Steam is called ARM, Absolutely Reliable Machine, which says it's a beat 'em up game. I feel like the animation style here is just a little unpolished, and this does seem like this is maybe a boxing simulation game, but it seems more like it's kind of just a idle action game. Yeah. 2D action game focused on battling without moving, which sounds boring. This is coming soon, English and Korean. We still are getting a lot of games that are demos, although the amount of demos that have come out have drastically dropped as soon as the Steam store stopped promoting games with demos. So yeah, that was a one-time thing or an annual thing by the looks of it. So maybe next year there will be another showcase event where they showcase a bunch of games with demos, and then the weeks before leading up to that we'll have lots of games releasing demos. But I don't think Valve has instilled in that one action a solid desire to have game developers to make demos all the time. The thing I was waiting to hear, and apparently is not coming anytime soon, was that Valve was going to say, we're not going to honor the 2-hour refund process as much because of the demos now being available. And I don't know how Valve could have ever actually announced that without irritating people. Moving on, Gamma Sutra has an article. According to an analyst, Pokemon Go revenue still on the rise despite the global pandemic. Yeah, it would take a lot to convince people to stop playing Pokemon Go until they just hit that burnout point. Once they hit that burnout point, I imagine people would stop playing Pokemon Go. But if it had become something of your habit and you weren't able to walk around and accomplish everything, they've probably given enough ways to continue to play the game somewhat to keep people enthralled. Whereas if Pokemon Go had not done anything and people actually just didn't open the app for 2 weeks, I imagine a lot of people would just forget about Pokemon Go and stop playing it. I definitely played several games on my cell phone that, where that's happened. I've installed it and then not played it for a couple of weeks and then forgotten about it. Speaking of my cell phone, it's having all kinds of trouble. Trying to get like Google Home to work with some assistant device, so that I could control my home automation stuff a little bit better, and it just won't work right at all. And it seems like it's Google's fault, and that they've just programmed it terribly. Let's see. Moving on, Gamatsu has an article. Vampire the Masquerade Swan Song launches for the PS5 and Xbox Series X and the PS4 and the Xbox One and the Switch and PC in 2021. You play as 3 vampires, harness their powers, and embrace their desires and face their demons. Interesting concept to not... It's going to be an Epic Store exclusive also. Not go as far with Vampire the Masquerade as they were before in the Bloodline series, because in the Bloodline series you were playing as like one of, I think, about 12 different factions of vampires, and Vampire the Masquerade is definitely around the idea of being one of many different factions, but it seemed like there was just too many options, and there definitely is a faction in Vampire the Masquerade where the vampires just look like vampires all the time, and they cannot pass at all as humans. But then they, I think, also have the ability to turn invisible, so that kind of balances it out. But yeah, I personally, as someone who hasn't played any of the Vampire Masquerade games or played it in real life as a live action role-playing game, personally I would want to be enthralled in the game and brought into that universe with relatable, understandable stories that are written very well, compared to being given a very open world game that has kind of a generic story, which I kind of feel like Bloodlines and Bloodlines, Bloodlines 1, I think, particularly had that problem. TechRaptor has an article here. Rims Racing aims to conquer motorcycle racing next summer. So yet another racing game. Both from Nacon. Nacon apparently announcing several games. I've never heard of Nacon, so it does kind of feel like they're coming out of nowhere. They must be like a French company. Yeah, it would be funny, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start hearing a lot more about Nacon and a lot less about Ubisoft in the next few years. Let's see. This. Well, if I was going to do that, I should have played this first. See, we have still a decent amount of news, and then we're gonna be done with this stream. We've been going an hour and 45 minutes. I'm trying to make these streams shorter, even though it just ends up with me spending a lot more time off screen playing Magic. That's still kind of preferable. OpenCritic has an article. Nacon Connect will spotlight 10 games today, including 4 reveals. So this was before the event happened, and so that's an announcement for an announcement that has already happened. Gamatsu has an article. The gravity-defying puzzle adventure game Sky Beneath has been announced for consoles and PC. Interesting. I have a Steam page, but I'm not going to follow a game that has just been announced. It's an interesting idea, but I can say this game almost certainly will not work with many movable people, AIs. Unless the AIs just have their own separate gravity. So this looks like this probably is a co-op game where you're doing kind of like Portal puzzles, and that's probably going to be it. Like you're probably not going to run into any kind of enemies of any kind. Seems like maybe the planet has long since been abandoned, and there's some kind of flower of some sort that is giving off a poisonous toxin. But yeah, it's an interesting concept. Just important to recognize that it is almost certainly going to be a puzzle game with less action than even Portal had, because Portal did have some turrets and things, and if you start changing the gravity on things, I don't know how bullets and turrets would be easily programmable. It'd be doable, it'd just kind of be difficult. Like I don't even know if there's code out there to do a 360 by 360 spherical scan. Like most of the times, if you're trying to find pathfinding or targeting, you only really need to look at a flat plane of 360-degree circles. You don't have to look up and down and all around. Moving on, we have a game on Steam called Deadly Night No Escape, which is suffering from some dark screenshot syndrome and does look like it is just an asset flip horror game. It's early access for $9.99, English, allegedly full audio. Nothing of interest there. We may start to see a little bit more horror games. It does seem like they've started to potentially open the floodgates for Halloween a little bit earlier than one would expect, but that does seem to be what's going to happen. Next, we have a game on Steam called Apprentice arriving, which looks like it might be a Star Wars game clone without the Star Wars license, and so instead you're playing as a mage with a sword. Visually, it's not particularly polished enough, unfortunately. It just does not look like a game that would be worth the effort. $17.99 makes it way too expensive, and how it's getting compared to Darksiders 2 and Castlevania Lord of Shadows, I don't know. English, again, allegedly full audio. This is a weird announcement, only in the fact that I thought this already would have happened. Pathologic 2's Bachelor scenario has been announced. Now, Pathologic 2 is effectively just a remake and arguably only a slight polish in improvement compared to Pathologic 1, which is an extremely weird game in the first place. And in the first game, there is a bachelor character, a doctor character, and then I think the third character class that you play is like an outsider. So if the bachelor scenario was not in the re-release of, or the release of Pathologic 2, then I guess the game was just not really finished. It would be the only way to really describe it. Unless I'm really confused, then the bachelor scenario was like the was like some kind of DLC. The same developers are also working on a game called Neuroskazaka for iOS Android. I'm working on the game called No by Heart also. And they're working on a game called Franz, all of which are supposed to be really small games, which honestly the developers of Pathologic are better off focusing on small games because they're just not going to succeed. Oh, he has first strike. That's how. Well, that was dumb. Next, we have a game on Steam called Turn on the Light, which looks like it's just a puzzle game. Yeah, it doesn't look like there's anything too special here. 99 cents, English only. Guess I can put it on the fall list and see if people say it's good for 99 cents. That's really the only real question you would have there, is whether or not that worked. Yeah, Gamasutra was talking about this report. Microsoft deciding to purchase Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment. I don't know if we talked about this before or not, but it does really beg the question how well Warner Brothers Interactive would do under the care of Microsoft. Like, because I don't know if Microsoft would kind of cut their budgets compared to what they usually have. If Microsoft would have them release whatever games they're working on and then kind of not fund any new projects. See, we don't really know. Microsoft has acquired quite a few companies, but we've yet to see, there's yet to been enough time to see if any of those companies successfully launch whatever games they're working on now and then get the funding to make more games. It may just be that Microsoft's method of operation is to buy companies, let them finish and publish whatever games they're working on now, and then just shutter the companies after that point. That it would not be out of character by any means compared to how Microsoft treats many other divisions and many other projects. Much like Google, where they just lose interest and decide to just abandon things. There is also a question about just how AT&T could sell Warner Brothers, because you're not really buying much if you're not getting licenses to use Batman or licenses to use Middle-earth or licenses to use any of the Lego games that have sub-licensed copyrighted content in there. And if I was Microsoft, I would heavily consider only buying the Lego group or only buying everything but not the Lego group, because those are fairly different people. And I don't mean the actual company called the Lego Group. I mean TT Games. There is a company called the Lego Group, but they're not video game related. Yeah, I've lost here. Only thing I can really do is this. See if I can draw a card. And that didn't do anything. Let's see. Gamatsu has an article. A murder mystery adventure game called Rainswept is coming to the PS4 and Xbox One and Switch all around July 21st through the 24th. And yeah, it looks kind of like a point and click adventure. Rated M while still being a point and click adventure. That's slightly interesting. There might be something interesting there, but that certainly isn't going to be a breakout AAA game that rocks the gaming world. Let's see. Gamatsu has a article here. The shoot 'em up Waifu Uncovered is coming to Switch on July 16th. Save the lives of 8 maidens under threat of alien attack. So you're just shooting up at terribly animated enemies with a pretty badly drawn anime girl in the background. Pretty low effort. And even this art style here of this character is drastically different than that art style. So yeah, that's not a likely to be good game. It's rated M. The thing, yeah, the trailer is showing him straight up naked with convenient nipple covering. But it does go to show you something, that a game like this would have almost certainly been, an adult game like this would have almost certainly been on either the Vita or the PlayStation and not allowed on the Nintendo Switch. And ever since Nintendo has just opened the floodgates and said, we will take your money, and we kind of don't care anymore about putting family friendly only content on our eShop in particular. So they've just allowed practically anything. In fact, I have not heard of a single story of anything having to be censored or anything being rejected from being listed on the Nintendo eShop. Apparently, the idea of not censoring is the only concept so far that Nintendo has figured out as far as running an online store, which I'm not against curation at a certain point. That because they're just letting everything in, they are also letting in a lot of garbage games that are not worth what they're selling for. But yeah, better that they just be lazy and not curate at all, versus they become hyper pro censorship and only let a small limited number of games. Of course, almost certainly, if there was ever any real blowback, if there were any like concerned parent groups out there that were complaining about adult games being on the eShop, I imagine Nintendo would step in and go, oh, thanks for telling us about it, as if they didn't know, and then remove all those games. Yeah, they would almost certainly bend the knee as soon as they could. Gamatsu has an article, the romance visual novel Ikono Yukizora no Triangle, coming to the PlayStation 4 on October 29th, which sounds like it is a love triangle of something. And from the looks of it, seeing two anime girls on the front, it does seem like there's probably a love triangle between these two anime girls and, I would guess, a male protagonist. Okay. You know, it would be fairly easy to make a great argument to not make so many romance/adult visual novel games if they just made regular games that had romance plots in it. And in all fairness, They are doing some of that. Witcher 3 definitely has romance paths and options in it that are of substance. The Last of Us 3 seems to have some romance in it. I think the general idea, though, is they should just say how many people on average in the real world have some kind of romance relationship going on. How many people are really in having those kind of relationships, and have that same number of people represented in video games, and just be realistic about it, instead of doing what they've been doing for decades, which is having almost every protagonist in a video game be some kind of celibate monk or nun that has no interest romantically, or you have a Leisure Suit Larry style game where the character is just obsessed with sex to an extreme. And even in the cases of Leisure Suit Larry, most of those games, there's actually very little sex. There is only attempts. I think the other part of that statement, though, that also would need to be said is it's not just that there would need to be more romance and actual sex, romance that leads to actual sex, or at least implied sex in AAA Western games, that there also needs to be well-written romance and adult situations in video games. And at the core of it, that is the problem, is that if it's not written well, it's not going to come off well received, whereas visual novels, being novels, have to be fairly well written, or at least they have to have the air of seeming like they might be fairly well written. And that is something visual novels mostly seem to have achieved for their demographic, for people who actually play them. I wanted to mention this tweet that CD Projekt Red put out here. Not this one. Here we go. 3 hours ago, they said CD Projekt Red is built on the foundation of mutual respect and tolerance. We accept our differences and focus on our passions for video games. Check out this interview with Adam Kikinski and Adam Bałowski to learn how diversity fuels our creativity. This part of the statement here, built on mutual foundation of mutual respect and tolerance, is a lie. Like, anyone who knows how CD Projekt Red has had a kind of incredibly large amount of crunch on its programmers, and how the management has been known to just completely ignore and not listen to any of the low-level employees' concerns, that does not feel like a foundation of mutual respect. And when you know the story of how the writer of the Witcher series feels like he was screwed out of a reasonable deal for the license of the Witcher series, that doesn't feel like that was a mutual respect thing, to have to sue to be treated fairly. Tolerance, that part didn't really trigger me so much or seem obvious, but yeah, CD Projekt, like many corporations, not about respecting their employees, not about respecting other people, and it's bull for somebody to virtue signal and say that. Also, while CD Projekt Cyberpunk seems to be very SJW woke and allow for same-sex and trans characters and all kinds of things like that, I don't recall any characters or any stories like that in the Witcher series. I don't think there's a single gay man or lesbian in the entire Witcher trilogy, as far as I know, unless you want to say like the friend of the Witcher is gay. But if he is, then there's a whole plot line in which his girlfriend gets blinded that makes no real sense at that point. So yeah, there's some questionable about this. And as far as CD Projekt Red, I don't think that they've made anything else of recent time that would say that they have this evidence to back up that claim. If anything, I would say that the Witcher series is kind of flamboyantly straight, in the sense that there was a lot of options in The Witcher 2 to romance and sleep with characters, and I believe you got like trading cards if you slept with all the characters in The Witcher 2, and they took that out, so they did kind of act a little bit more mature in the third game. But yeah, that history just does not stand up to scrutiny. Moving on, TechRaptor has an article. Donkey Kong and Shin Megami Tensei join Nintendo Online Switch Online. So, Donkey Kong Country, Natsume Championship Wrestling, and the original Shin Megami Tensei game, which I imagine if there's not a remake for that, there probably would be no way to make a remake. Also a game called The Immortal and Gun Deck. Let's see. And you can get the Nintendo Switch Online for $19.99 for 12 months, or $7.99 for 3 months. It's kind of a hard sell even at $19.99 though, because of the way that you're just kind of getting a couple of NES ROMs every month, and then that's about it. Online access. Play. Got it. Took a lot of work to get there, but made it to the end. I really wish I could change up the gameplay a little bit and play some different colored decks, but honestly, I'm still never found enough time to build a deck that even seemed like it had a chance of winning higher than what I'm playing on the black deck. Let's see. Gamatsu has an article here for the PC, PS4, and Xbox One. The Dark Pictures anthology Little Hope launches October 30th. Limited edition includes Little Hope and Man of Medan. Feels like Man of Medan came out just a couple months ago and that they're kind of rushing. But apparently it came out last year. To obviously a little fanfare. This idea of the Dark Pictures anthology really does kind of seem like they're just trying to tell these horror stories. They're relatively shorter, and release them kind of on an annualized basis without overworking themselves like crazy. Maybe there's just something there that would work. Maybe after the 5th or 6th game, people would still be willing to play them because they have kind of a consistency of quality. They might be the next evolution of playing like a Walking Dead Telltale game. But in all fairness, I think a lot of people that were fans of the Walking Dead Season 1 Telltale game did not make it to the end. I have yet to make it all the way to the end. I believe I own all those games. I've just hadn't found the time that I wanted to play it. See. Moving on, TechRaptor has this article. A family video game database has launched, supports nearly 600 games. What does that mean? So this journalist, a YouTuber, Father 3 has made a family video game database to help parents that are unfamiliar with games. The video showing the website can be seen. So, website is fairly well made, with tabs allowing inquisitive parents to look at all the games listed, which is exactly 597. In comparison, in case 597 does sound like a big number, on my wish list alone, there's 2,400 plus games I'd like to buy, and there's probably another 2,000 to 3,000 games I already own on Steam, and that's the games that I curated and actually purchased. If I had just tried to get a full listing of all the games that were on Steam, you're probably talking in the realm of 10 to 30,000 games, many of which have zero relevancy and nobody will have ever played or purchased. Let's see. You can sort alphabetically through BAFTA-nominated games, making your own video games, one-button games, and solving a mystery. There's 70 lists in total that could theoretically help parents choose a game for any occasion. Let's see. There are 2 other websites that are tied to the family video game database that look useful. Ask About Games, where parents can ask questions about game ratings and the like, and Parent Zone, where parents are provided information on how to teach their children to browse the internet safely and confidently. So that seems like it doesn't even have like a really good system to say here's the games that you should consider. And honestly, if a parent doesn't know anything about video games and they can't get help from somebody that they're friends with or know, they're probably just so lackadaisical about it that they just don't care, and they would just let their kids play with anything. A lot of times parents think their kids are special too, so that they're more than willing to let their kids play a mature game when they're 5 years old. And then of course a lot of parents are just overprotective and won't let their kids play a teen plus game when they're 15 years old. So it kind of goes both ways in some extremes. Let's see. TechRaptor's quick take here is, this isn't a terrible idea, ... in the middle. I'm just a hair trigger on a hair trigger about whiny people trying to inject their BS into games, but it seems like a sensible website made by a sensible individual. It's possible to expect that all parents are deeply familiar with gaming, so a website helping them decipher what's good for their kids is a good idea. This is another guy I don't think I've ever seen before. Yep. There's definitely a bigger issue, though, this. There definitely is a bigger issue with the with the concept of video games that are appropriate for kids, and the fact that there's just so few games that are appropriate for kids. So, and his website's not got enough hosting, so if it ever got super popular, it would be done. It's taminggaming.com, which is a cute URL. But let's see. Here you've got a game that's rated E. Here you've got a game that's rated Teen 7. Here you've got one that's Teen plus 12. So it does kind of work, but it kind of doesn't work if this was where you were going to start to look for somebody that's E for everyone. A lot of these games also probably not super recognizable by anybody who knows games. Let's see. There's some categories here. Let's see. Your first video game. Persevere after losing. Motion plus Wii games. So talking about Wii games in 2020 is fairly pointless. It'd be, I think, fairly hard to find like Wii games in some of these, and at least. Remote play together with Steam. That is a feature I think most parents wouldn't know. Here you have a Know Your Body game, but then they're suggesting a Mortician's Tale, which I don't know if that really is a kid-friendly game from what I've seen on the screenshots. Then the Survive the Night games, and then they're suggesting Subnautica, which can be scary for some people, and then Minecraft seems reasonable. Making your own games, and then a bunch of things they don't recognize. Ease loneliness with intergenerational games, which that's an interesting concept. And then free with Google Play Pass, which the fact that there's nothing that's free with the iOS and Apple games is a statement on the problems with trying to get any kind of app on Apple iOS for free. It's just a nightmare. Everything costs money. Everything's too expensive from what I've ever seen. I've never used an Apple phone, but every time I go to look at what would be the free equivalent to the free app I have on my Android phone, I really have to struggle to find something that is free instead of something that costs $1, $2, $3. There's just this Apple tax, this Apple premium for everything. Do we have enough to win here? 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes. We have 1 extra health. Let's see. Tech Raptor has an article here. Halo 3 PC comes to the Master Chief Collection next week. Which it really does feel like the Master Chief Collection was barely anything when it actually originally launched, in the fact that they're just staggering the releases of everything else. I need one more win to get the experience win. I also said I would get a whole bunch of gems. Like, in theory, I will get a bunch of gems if I unlock the Mastering Pass. But if I cannot get this Mastering Pass in the next 28 days or so, up to 3,400 by itself, well then I won't unlock the Mastery Pass to get these more gems. And at that point I think I would just have to use real world money and buy some gems, and that would suck. Because I definitely don't want to put more money into Magic. OpenCritic has an article here. The Deadly Premonition 2, A Blessing in Disguise, is getting really, really weak reviews, mostly because of performance, and it seems like they've confirmed, at least to Jim Sterling, according to Jim Sterling, that they're not planning on fixing any of the performance problems, which that in itself is a big issue, because they could have at least had the decency to string people along and said a patch is in the works. But yeah, you can see it has a weak open critic rating. Top critics are averaging a 63, and 33% of them recommend it. It's just getting really, really bad reviews. I think even if it had amazing performance reviews, it probably would still not get much more. So if it had no performance problems, probably would get up to like a 6.5 or 7. There was definitely a review I saw that was like really high from somebody, but maybe it wasn't from anybody. Score. Yeah. We have kind of nobody's giving them very high scores to just get at the top of the list. I do own Deadly Premonition 1, but I don't know if I really need to ever play it. That's kind of one of those games where it's good enough just to own it, just to support the creation of the weirdo games, compared to actually putting yourself through that frustration. And if I was going to cover Deadly Premonition 1, I'd almost certainly try and speedrun it as much as possible and not do any of the side stuff, which is probably the wrong way to play that game. Komatsu has an article for the PS4 and Switch. Earth Defense Force World Brothers is coming to the West in 2021, which this is a voxel looking game, a spin-off game for the Earth Defense Force game. We had seen it was announced before, but I guess they hadn't actually announced that it was coming to the West. Let's see. Komatsu has an article for the PS4 and Switch. Giraffe and Annika for PS4 and Switch. Character and gameplay trailer. Which, I guess this might be Annika. This is from NIS America. So it looks like a more kid-friendly platformer, 3D platformer game. I always want to see 3D platformers work. And this does kind of feel like a Ni no Kuni Japanese style experience. I always want to see 3D platformers work. I very rarely do find 3D platformers that work. And I think a lot of that might very well just boil down to the fact that Mario 64 is kind of the first and best 3D platformer, and everything else has really failed to do any better or improve, other than possibly other Mario games. Checkraptor has a review themselves for Deadly Premonition 2, A Blessing in Disguise. The graphics also aren't particularly great from what I've seen. Sometimes you do just get this point where video games in particular, when developed by smaller, weirder creators, sometimes it does feel like they just take the money and run and waste it and act crazy with it and kind of take your money and laugh. It isn't just total BS that some creators do need somebody with a tight leash around their neck to make sure that they actually stay on focus and actually make a good product. I think George Lucas is probably a great example of that. Without editors and and other people in charge to tell them no. The Star Wars movies got worse and worse. Anyways, TechRaptor's review, they gave it an 8.0. They said it's a great follow-up to a beloved cult classic. It has an intriguing story and eccentric quirks, but feels safer on the gameplay side of things. And they do mention an inconsistent frame rate, easily repetitive combat, and less creative gameplay with more cutscenes. Its pros is an intriguing murder mystery story, quirky but interactive, entertaining environment, open world activities, an eccentric mix of horror, comedy, and drama. Excuse me. I need to wrap up fairly quickly here. So maybe TechRaptor just didn't have as many frame rate issues as a lot of other people did, or maybe TechRaptor's writers just watched Twin Peaks yet again. Deadly Premonition really is a game that your experience with it will drastically be affected by your obsession with Twin Peaks and how happy and obsessed you're still with around Twin Peaks. Which honestly, I'm in the kind of nice position where I heard and felt all the hype and the love from the video game journalist community around Twin Peaks and Deadly Premonition being so heavily inspired by Twin Peaks that I was completely immune from that hype train when I actually tried to watch Twin Peaks and found it to be uninteresting and couldn't even make it through like the first episode. Moving on, we have a article here, a romance visual novel called Tonari ni Konojo no Iru Shiwasi Curious Queen is coming to the PS4 on October 29th in Japan. Looks like it's a romance visual novel focused on one character. Let's see. TechRaptor has an article, WWE 2K Battlegrounds enters the ring in September. This is the weirdly deformed creatures that was announced, I would say 4 or 5 months ago, and people just laughed at it. It was just so ridiculously hideous visually. And it was basically immediately dismissed, and I imagine somebody will cover it and play it just to laugh at it a second time, and that'll be the entirety of it. Let's see. Next we have a game on Steam called Hopley Chess, which is apparently some kind of turn-based strategy. It seems like it's somewhat like chess, but not really. And visually it just doesn't look polished enough to interest me. $2.99 English only. Maybe if it was 99 cents I could overlook these graphics in the hopes that there's an actual interesting publishing puzzle game there, but nah, not at $2.99. Let's see. It's only slightly related, but the Raspberry Pi default installer now includes the ability to install RetroPie. So here we can show it. So now the new Raspberry Pi installer, you can choose an OS, you can install RetroPie images by default, which is slightly more helpful, but not super more helpful. Because the Raspberry Pi 4 has 2 mini HDMI connections, there is a new image also that allows you to use two monitors at the same time while running RetroPie, which is an interesting twist because it then allows you to potentially have like a screen that is above your regular screen that would indicate what game you're playing, what system it was on, be kind of like an attract logo at the top of arcade games, where I don't think there are too many games that use two monitors though to that advantage. The only one I can think of is, I believe, Punch Out in the arcade had two monitors, and maybe a couple of other early arcade games had two monitors. But the vast majority of things don't have two monitor support. So it's not like you're going to be able to run two separate instances on a Raspberry Pi 4 easily and have somebody play a player versus player experience like that. Although that would be interesting. There is a way to run Linux in a setup called multi-head, where multiple monitors, keyboards, and mouse are all plugged into the same computer, and each is just its own effective computer. But the Raspberry Pi 4 probably doesn't have enough power to make a satisfactory experience if you did that. I'm not sure the Raspberry Pi 4 even has enough power and processing power to have a great experience if you're just trying to use it as a daily computer to browse the internet and do things like that. Yeah, it would be nice if you could suggest to like teachers that they just need a bunch of Raspberry Pis in their computer lab, but in reality, no, you would be much better off just buying some cheap Dell computers and having the opportunity to install Windows on them and potentially upgrade them and install new and different software instead of locking yourself into what is effectively a non-standard setup. Next we have a game on Steam called Endless Dead, which looks like it's an asset flip top-down twin-stick shooter in which you're shooting vampires instead of zombies, so I have to applaud that much. It's $8.99, English, allegedly full audio. It's not gonna make it to the fall list either. And that's gonna be our last game that we played. We only have a couple more things to talk about and then we'll be done. We have a game called Sweets to the Factory. Factory of Sweets. Man, I misread that terribly. This looks like a pipe dream game. And in a funny way, that might save this game because there aren't too many pipe dream game clones on Steam. And I don't know if there's one that's good. Although they're calling it Plumber. $1.19, English only. Achievements with numbers, which typically means that it is an achievement-focused game. So there probably isn't a lot of experience here if I was to guess, but I'll put it on the follow list anyways. The danger here is that there's 30 puzzles, and that's it for $1.20. Next we have a Gamatsu article here. Grisaya Phantom Trigger Volume 4 is coming to the Switch this summer. Volume 3 due out on July 22nd. More, I believe, visual novel games. It's already on Steam. So, yeah, let's see. Here it is on Steam. It's got a flashy cutscene intro that in no way represents what the actual game looks like. Phantom Trigger apparently has to do with guns, so they must be like assassins, anime schoolgirl assassins, typical trope in that series. Yeah, it looks interesting enough, and $8.99 is not terrible, but if you're going to get all of them, you'd have to get the bundle and you'd be paying a full $60, which even that, as far as visual novels, is not a terrible price. So I'll put this on the follow list. Of course, a lot of the visual novels on my wish list and follow list are aspirational. Just want to support the community. Probably would never cover them because they're too long and they're not that interesting. And not interesting to probably the people that watch my channel, although there's so few of them. Who's to say? But they would be a lot of effort, certainly, to play. A lot of time. Moving on, Gamatsu has an article for Switch. No, not Switch, smartphones. The Professor Layton in the Lost Future HD is going to have its mobile debut trailer. It's due out July 13th. It does have its trailer out now. I think I kind of might enjoy playing Professor Layton games a little bit more than Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney games. And apparently there's fewer Professor Layton games than I thought there were. Although I think there might be a spin-off character in the Professor Layton series that they're not counting. Famitsu review scores for issue 1648 are out, and they give the Blair Witch game a 30 out of 40, which is pretty low, and Indivisible a 32 out of 40. Paper Mario and the Origami King gets a 36 out of 40, which is very high for the Switch. Pushy and Pulley in Blockland gets a 29 out of 40, which is fairly low. Rigid Force Redux gets a 29 out of 40, and then Sword Art Alsatian Lycross for PS4 and Xbox One gets a 32 out of 40. 32 out of 40, about average. Take note that this one is labeled for PS4 and Xbox One instead of just PS4, and then this one is for PS4 also. But the vast majority of games that they were reviewed were either Switch exclusives or got labeled as Switch exclusives by Famitsu. So yeah, Switch still seems to be king as far as the Japanese market, and we'll have to see what happens when the PlayStation 5 comes out, if that changes. TechRaptor has this article, How to Crush Your Backlog with the GG app. Good reads for video games, apparently. GG is a platform agnostic service that lets you organize your games, track your play status, and make lists and rankings that can be shared for your own reference. With access to a database of nearly every game ever made, it's an easy way to catalog what you've been up to and play and what's next. You can organize and sort through games depending on their play status, played, dropped, shelved, and beaten. See, this honestly feels like this would be just more work, or by using lists of every game I own on PS4. Interesting. Well, there is definitely an argument that the library system built into Steam is not as useful as it should be. I've managed to do quite a decent job organizing my games, but certainly there is a problem there. And I don't know if I made like a 12-month calendar and I had, say, 24 to 30 games listed in that calendar, I don't know if that would really motivate me anymore to play those games. And I don't know if I really would want to lock myself into that. And here, if I look at this, let's just point at these pictures. I've played this one, and Bayonetta, and Her Story, and I don't know what that one is, but I recognize all the others. So I'm about half of whatever this person's list is. So here you have the reviewer pointing out something that they probably shouldn't point out, that in a year, the busiest years of 2016 and 2019, they only beat 15 games. If I only beat 15 games for my channel, I'd be very unhappy with that, because I beat almost all the games I play, and I do way more than 15 a year. Although I've slowed down quite a bit, so I could see myself getting down to doing only 15 a year. But it definitely opens up the danger of saying, yeah, a lot of mainstream video game journalists, not particularly very good at playing video games at all, and don't really play video games at all. Somebody somewhere also ranted about how they were upset that YouTube video game content creators existed for pretty much just going for their deplatforming. I think it had to do in general with a rant against Angry Joe, but in specific a rant against Angry Joe, but in general also a rant about how mainstream video game journalists don't like YouTube video game journalists at all and hate them effectively, seem to, at least in every instance I've seen. Also, Angry Joe has been banned on Reset Era, his content and conversations about him, which Reset Era is just garbage. Microsoft put out this blog, which would be some interest to programmers. They have Project xCloud to help developers, helping game developers stay connected. So they're showing off these servers that they've built, which have what looks like a network connector on front and what looks like a special back-end network connector for like fiber optic or really, really fast Ethernet. You have to put in a fairly expensive module into these kind of connectors. I have a router that has a couple of these, but I couldn't afford the modules, and they couldn't connect the module to anything anyways. It's kind of a silly concept that you would have like one back-end connector on a router or a switch to connect for the internet traffic, but then all the other traffic can be connected slower. Ideally, you would just want everything to be at the same speed and at the same connector. But yeah, they're setting up a lot of servers and a lot of game development in the cloud and a game execution in the cloud. That is definitely what they're trying to push. Let's see, where did I put that? Moved it over here, didn't I? So we saw earlier that 75 million people have played Rocket League. And I've been meaning to show off this video game charts website I found, but I haven't had an opportunity. Okay. So I found this website, vgcharts.z, or vgcharts with a Z, no dots. And it does seem to fairly easily show you the total units shipped, although there's some weirdness here because Pokemon is like 365 million units amongst all the Pokemon properties, and Super Mario, same thing, Grand Theft Auto, FIFA, Sims. It's not until you get down to, say, like Wii Sports. I think there's only been 2 Wii Sports games that have sold 115 million, and the Lego games combined are 104. NBA 2K probably is still a whole series there. Dragon Quest is 80 million. Tomb Raiders, Halos, Just Dance, Counter-Strike, Oregon Trail, 65 million. See, yeah, it's quite a while down until you see a game that you can identify as just being that one game. Even Bejeweled had sequels, and anything popular would have sequels. The Witcher has like 3 games, and they have 50 million. So it's a hard comparison to say you have 75 million players when you very possibly gave away a bunch of copies of your game to guarantee that was 50 million shipped. But it's some comparison. It's better than nothing. And then that brings me to the Humble Bundle store, and it doesn't look like there's any games bundles right now, so we'll probably get one in a couple days. I'll have to play off screen to get 1 to 6 more victories. still trying to get the individual card rewards and trying to get 15 wins a day, but it is also wasting a bunch of my time by doing that. And let's see. Here we have a game that came out on Steam called Asset Flip Tycoon Simulator, which just like admitting how awful some of these games are. There's a Hello Neighbor card game that's coming soon. See if there's anything else of importance that needs to be announced. By the looks of it, it seems like the answer to that is no. Either there just weren't any new announcements, or Twitter's not showing me any new announcements. A World of Warcraft Shadowlands beta launches next week. That really goes to show how little interest there is in World of Warcraft. Ninja has picked YouTube Gaming over a return to Twitch. Okay. And let's see. What else do we have? If there's any other announcements. Let's see if there's any new announcements. And it sounds like they're still working on my roof. But yeah, who knows? They could just be trying to get my attention for all I know. Yeah, so had I started right now, I would have been extremely tired and wasted 3 hours waiting for them to finish, and they still wouldn't have been finished. So I was definitely right in the fact that I should have just started when I did start as soon as possible. And that is generally the case, is just to not procrastinate and instead just get it done, even if you are going to have to work in some adverse conditions, if it's possible to get it done at all. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this stream. Thanks for the one person talking to me in the chat at the beginning, and everyone else, thanks for watching. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and gift me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.